You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
The Washington Post recently wrote an article, and the title was, "A Rural Washington School Board Race Shows How Far-Right Extremists Are Shifting to Local Power." The establishment candidate thought she was a shoo-in, but she hadn't contended with the homeschooling, anti-masking member of the far-right 3% movement. So the Washington Post article, it brings up some really, really interesting points, whether you're on the far left or the far right or somewhere in the middle where I kind of sit, slightly right of center. So we're going to be talking about this. We're going to read majority of this article, and then we're going to kind of go through some of the things. Is this what's going on with the far right movements? Are they going more grassroots? We had the whole January 6th thing. We just had the January 6th anniversary. Depending on which side you're on, it was either the most horrific thing in America's history, or it's something that happened and we've kind of moved on and shouldn't really be worked up about it. All right, so let's jump on in here. But before we do, if you're new, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, and I read the news from that perspective. Why am I reading about far-right extremists in rural Washington? I've talked many times about kind of the divide in Washington state. You've got like downtown Seattle and the areas around Seattle are very definitely left of center. Let's just leave it that way. Very definitely left of center. But you travel 1 hour east of Seattle, maybe an hour and a half east of Seattle, you get over the Cascade Mountains. It's a different world. You've got farmers, you've got farming communities, you've got wide open spaces, and things are a little different. You are far more likely to see a Trump sign up or still up than anything else. You know what I mean? So it's definitely more right of center the further out you go. And I think this is something that everybody is aware of, but when you live in a city like Seattle, you're just so used to seeing stuff that you may not agree with, and it's like, this is pretty normal. Well, it's not normal, and that's what we're going to read about today. It's an interesting story, whether you believe left or right. Let's jump on into it. On the morning she met her opponent for coffee, Sarah Cole walked in with a front-runner's confidence. To Cole, the school board seat in this rural red district about an hour outside of Seattle was all but hers. Educators and community leaders had endorsed her. She had name recognition from years in the PTA Association. And besides, she was running against Ashley Sova, who was a homeschooling, anti-masking member of the far-right 3% movement. What always drives me crazy is that they try and paint the far right in just this gun-toting, shoot 'em up, military style. And there's a lot of folks who have ideology that doesn't lean left, that isn't necessarily the way it's portrayed in the media. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to read this, is because I think a lot of folks have this idea in their head. And this article tries to paint that idea even further, but it's really interesting. So she's a homeschooler. All right. She's an anti-masker. All right. And she's a member of the 3% movement. 3% movement being the kind of the group and ideology of in the Revolutionary War, only 3% of Americans fought in that war against the British government. Whether or not that's true, that's always been debated, but that's the general concept, right? 3%. It's the true patriots that fought in the Revolutionary War. That's kind of the general concept there. So I kind of thought I had it in the bag, Cole recalled. She's the front runner who was supposed to win. I think everybody probably did, right? I read through kind of her Facebook page on the political campaign that she ran, and I think it was very shocking to her and to others that she lost. Their coffee date, this is the coffee date between the two candidates, the coffee date that October, as recounted by both women, was an exercise in gritted teeth civility. Those are good descriptive words there, right? Gritted teeth civility. Cole asked about the 3% logo tattooed on Sova's neck in red, white, and blue bullets. 𝒂𝒂 tried to corner Cole on critical race theory, and in the end, they took a photo and promised to work together no matter who was elected, each privately expecting Cole to win. In December, however, it was 𝒂𝒂 who was sworn in, the second 3%er on the 5-person Eatonville school board. All right, so this is in the city of Eatonville. Eatonville is about an hour and 20 minutes south of Bellevue, where I am, maybe an hour and a half in bad traffic. It's like 10 hours. It's down one of those freeway systems that tends to get jammed up. Eatonville is due west of Mount Rainier, and that's where a lot of folks, if you're on your way to Rainier, you may pass through Eatonville. I've been to Eatonville many, many times. Because I used to climb Mount Rainier a lot. I've summited 9 times. Don't know how many attempts, probably 25 attempts. Sometimes you don't make it because of weather. Sometimes somebody in your party quits. Up there a lot. So going through Eatonville is a pretty regular occurrence. And also I did a lot of appraising back in the day in Eatonville. It's a small town. It's kind of a mill town of about probably 3,000 people. I think the 2010 census said it was 2,000 or 2,700. But so this gal got elected to the 5-person Eatonville school board. The 3%er ideology, which is part of the self-styled militia movement, promotes conspiratorial views about government overreach and imagines, in quotes, patriotic Americans revolting against perceived violations of the Constitution. That's the Washington Post spin on things, right? So you got to kind of take everything with a grain of salt. But where this article is going is that, oh my gosh, what's happening? We've got somebody who is a little bit more than right of center in a school board position. What happened? I mean, that's kind of the general gist here, right? Presented as defending liberty, in quotes, extremist analysts say that those far-right views are spreading in conservative places like Eatonville, where the school board race spiraled into a fight over mask mandates and how race is taught in school. Little critical race theory. Being critical of critical race theory is a lot of how this has gone. I mean, all you got to do is look at Florida, kind of, oh, yeah, how about them apples, right? Cole lost by more than 200 votes. So there's another town in southern Washington. It's called Enumclaw. And it got to the point where it's like, yeah, we don't really want to be part of King County. Can we annex into any other county around us? They were looking at doing that because these cities, these towns that are a little bit further out, they have conservative viewpoints. And those conservative viewpoints, many of those conservative viewpoints, I agree with. Not necessarily, hey, let's join the 3%ers or, the Boogaloo Boys. Those are what many would consider extreme far right. Even though if you look at some of their ideology, you're like, well, yeah, that's just some conservative stuff in there. But they're often pointed to as these are the guys that did the January 6th deal. Okay, there were some of them involved there. All right. But they just basically get hammered on for all of these things. And in a place like Eatonville, that's very conservative, if you have, a community that is, this is not downtown Seattle. This is not Seattle. Let's just put it that way. So I don't think it's shocking by any means that you've got somebody that ran a campaign and won and also happens to be a member of the 3%ers. I think everybody that is left of center is just like, oh no, what's going on? But we don't question that when, we've got literally, we just had a recall, an anti-election, I like to refer to it as, for 𝒔𝒕𝒕𝒍𝒆, and she is our socialist alternative member. We haven't freaked out over that as a state as far as you've got a known socialist on the Seattle City Council. The race was basically sabotaged by the national narrative, Cole said. This is one of those interesting lines where I'm like, okay, so she really believed she lost because of the national narrative? She sounded incredulous that parents felt best represented by a 3%er whose kids aren't even in public school. That's a fair point. This woman doesn't even have kids in the school district. Okay. which kind of further shows that, we had this big, all right, here's our leftist ideologies. And then we've had more of a pushback. In Seattle in particular, you had 4 major races this last election, and 3 of them were won either by, Democratic moderates or, dare I say, a Republican. We had a Republican win Seattle City Council position. So we've got this big pushback of people saying, yeah, I don't really like the way I see things going. And the far left ideology, we're going to do a little pushback. And if that means taking somebody who's got some ideology that's a little farther right than we're comfortable with, they're going to take that over maybe somebody who's got some other ideas on, call it critical race theory, things like that. So the woman who lost said, I don't even know how to explain it except to say in the face of the facts, they chose to run with fears. Okay, maybe. So that's the spin here, is you voted based on fear. All right. When in reality, they probably voted with somebody that is not okay with critical race theory. And that is how a lot of these outer lying towns, that's how things are going. And so you've got this narrative of, you've got these far right ideologies kind of infiltrating mainstream. And that's because the far left has gone just nutso, and you're going to have to go off to the right to probably get somewhere back to center, back to something that is reasonable. And so, I mean, I get it. I'm not running out to join the 3% or any other far right-wing group, but I'm also like, okay, they want to do their thing. You kind of leave them alone. I'm also not hammering on those who are in, far left ideological groups. That's not my thing. These groups want to do their thing. That's fine. But when it comes to issues such as critical race theory, where you've got kids involved, I think the parents in these school districts are like, yep, we're pretty much a hard no. What happened in Eatonville, according to Extremist Trackers, is bigger than a small town upset. In recent years, far-right groups have been moving away from national organizing to focus on building grassroots support, harnessing conservative outrage to influence school boards and other local offices. That's that pushback. Well, we've had enough of what's going on from the far left. So, all right, let's either take a little bit more of a moderate approach here, or we're going to look at something that some people might consider a little bit uncomfortably further right than they would like. So that effort was stepped up after the January 6th attack, and the U.S. Capitol left much of the militant right under federal scrutiny and in operational disarray. Are the far right groups in operational disarray? I mean, this just sounds like a narrative that they would like to believe, that the Washington Post would like you to believe. Is that the case? I don't know. I don't sit around and research far right groups and their operational status. Eatonville is among several rural conservative parts of the West where members of self-styled militias are making inroads through what researchers call a mix of opportunism and intimidation. Really? You're going to go with that? Okay. Once fringe views about government tyranny now match the mainstream conservative discourse on vaccine and mask mandates, softening the public image of movements linked to political violence. If you're going to make a change, you don't do it by storming the Capitol. You can make change by using the processes that you've been given and starting at the bottom, said Matt Marshall. He's the founder of the Washington 3% and a member of the Eatonville School Board. So you've got, what I do find interesting is you've got multiple 3%ers in this very small community that have been elected to the school board. I mean, that is really interesting. Just like you've got multiple members of, abolitionists, abolish the police, socialist alternative here in Seattle. You've got multiple, members of what many would consider the far left on the city council. I mean, we just do in Seattle. That's just Seattle, right? And there's pushback on that. And so why wouldn't you have that kind of pushback in a small rural community? 2 years ago, watchdog groups warned that Marshall's election represented, he's the first guy that got elected, Marshall's election represented the dangerous creep of anti-government extremism. Today, the Washington 3%ers claim members in dozens of official posts throughout the state, including a mayor, a county commissioner, and at least 5 school board seats. 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍, an officer with the group, was among 4 female members who ran in local races this cycle. 3 won. So we've got this push going on. And the midterm elections in 2022, how do you think that's going to go? I think that's going to go to the right as well, right? Because you've just got so many indicators of not only policy, but things going on that people are like, yeah, I don't really think that's the road I want to go down anymore. Yeah, I can't really back what I used to think was more of a leftist ideology. Yeah, I don't really like those guys on the far right either. There's got to be a little bit more moderation. Most Washington 3%ers in public roles keep the affiliation quiet for fear of backlash from anti-fascist activists or employers. Not 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆. She openly embraces the ideology, which comes from the debunked notion. See, this is the spin. It comes from the notion that only 3% of colonists rose up at the American Revolution. Her membership is evident in the ink on her neck. See, we're bringing that up again. We're trying to make her out as just kind of this, something outside of the norm that shouldn't be on a school board. Ink on her neck and in photos online in which she makes the movement's 3-finger hand gestures. So they've got their own hand sign, all right? When asked about 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆's 3% ties, a spokesperson for Eatonville School said the district doesn't comment on personal lives of board members. Fair enough. 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 said her involvement is about survivalist prepping, not overthrowing the government. So I think a lot of the far right movements, this is kind of the crux of it. A lot of people want to believe, well, you're just going to overthrow the government, when in fact they've got various different elements that they believe, like prepping. And why are we prepping? I know of a lot of folks right now prepping. Some very good friends of mine, they have become full tilt preppers. I am not in that group. I'm not prepping. But if worse came to worse, I could probably get by for a while. Like we've put stuff away like water and batteries. And do I have a generator? No. But, we've got some general stuff. So if something bad happened, we could survive for a while. Do I have enough for 6 months or a year? No. But I'm also kind of more moderate, and maybe I'm just unprepared. Maybe I'm just lazy and I don't want to get all the stuff and just have all this stuff piled up. But I don't think it's a bad idea to be prepared to be able to live on your own for like a month, maybe a couple. I'd be really thin afterwards because I just don't have enough food set aside. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So I'm not what people assume that I am, 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 said. I love the fact that I'm different, and maybe that makes me scary to some. But I don't know. I'm not this gun-toting right-wing extremist that they all think I am. All right, that's from her perspective. And then 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 was reminded that she was quite literally toting a gun at that moment with a pistol strapped to her hip. And she laughed. Because when you say gun-toting, what comes to mind? And she basically says, but I'm not waving it around. You know what I mean, she said. This is a tool. It's an equalizer in any bad situation. I'm not here to intimidate people. So Washington State is an open carry. I think Oregon is too. And it comes more from frontier times than needing to confront somebody in the parking lot at Walmart. You know what I mean? In a lot of these communities, they open carry. It's not that big of a deal. They've got a concealed weapon permit. That is just kind of how it goes out here in the far West. Because we are upper left, USA here. And while the rest of the nation was fighting the Civil War, we were in Indian territory. So, you've got some crazy stuff going on, and carrying a gun just isn't that big of a deal. I don't carry one. I don't have a handgun. I don't have a need to carry a rifle around. But if that's what you want to do, I'm okay with that. I could think of a lot worse things to do. Got a photo here in the, for those of you on the audio, and it's a photo that I have seen. I mean, it's not a photo. It's an image that I've seen quite a few times, and it's right on the way to Mount Rainier, down on the southern end before you get up to Paradise and start your climb from there. And then you go up, to your first camp and maybe a second camp, and then you do your summit deal. On the way, there's a bunch of farmland, flat farmland, with the mountain in the background. You can't see the mountain because you got all these trees, but they've got these big Trump signs. I mean, they're big Trump signs. It's like, wow, I was just in Seattle where everything was littered with Biden signs and Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. And then you drive an hour and 15 minutes away and you're confronted with enormous Trump signs. So, you've just got this real diversity based on where you live. Next section here is democracy is on fire. Silva isn't wrong when she argues that her extreme views are simply representative of local politics, and that's the concern, according to researchers who track the mainstreaming of far-right ideologies. Conservatives have moved so far right, researchers say, that there's now little daylight between Silva's positions as a 3%er and those most elected Republican leaders or pundits on Fox News shows. That to me, that statement is just incorrect. It's just incorrect. It's a spin, right? And that's what we're talking about. It's a spin that is not true. But we're trying to get some juice out of affiliating everybody on the right with the 3%ers or the Boogaloo Boys or any of the other ones that you want to try and blame for the January 6th insurrection. And I put that around quotes because that was not an insurrection. Call it whatever you want. They bum rushed the Capitol. So Kate Bitts of the Western States Center, a regional anti-extremism watchdog, see the direction we went there, said the school board push is an extension of an inside-outside tactic of armed groups, fielding candidates for legitimate posts while simultaneously agitating for political violence. Now, has she talked about political violence at all? Is there anything indicating she is for political violence? No. And she basically said, hey, I'm a prepper. It's like, okay. So you got to kind of read between the lines here. Mainstream media would have you believe that everybody right of center is an extremist and advocating political violence. And that is just not the case. But things have just gotten so extreme. Even when you do watch Fox, they push everything is exaggerated, in my opinion. A lot of it is exaggerated because they're trying to offset what the left is saying and what mainstream media portrays everything. So everything's got its spin, and you just got to kind of filter through to what you think is, the truth and is really happening. So right now in Washington State, you've got a real push-pull going on. And these elections are kind of showing that folks are tired of the status quo, which here in the state of Washington, a lot of it has gone to the left. A lot of Democrats in Washington State. And so you are seeing kind of the fruits of people watching what's going on and being really disappointed with how things are going. And a lot of the policy that I talk about in Seattle has to do with politicians who many would say haven't done much, and they just kind of let things go and have let things spin out of control. And so now we're at a point where we need to kind of reel some of those policies back in and get control of things again. And so in the meantime, you've got this narrative where people are saying, but these far right folks, they're infiltrating mainstream. All right, well, let's take a look and see what the far left has done, and maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle, if that's possible. I don't think it is, but now I'm looking at a photo in downtown Eatonville. There's a sign out in front. It's in front of a knife store, and it says, "All knives matter." Man, could you imagine having that in Seattle or San Francisco? All lives matter. That would not work. That would not work out well for marketing. So, so a school board, a 3%er makes it onto a school board election, and the Washington Post carries an article. And I think a lot of folks will read this article and they will just say, the end is near. We're being overrun by, people believing in political ideology that is, grounded in violence. Vast majority of people don't believe in political violence. There are some factions that do. That is, hey, if things get bad enough, don't tread on me kind of thing. And to a certain extent, I think a lot of folks are tired of having their freedom treaded on. They're tired of having ideology shoved down their throat, particularly when it comes to schools and the school boards and the whole critical race theory. I think that was a major, major component of the 2020 elections. And for those running on a campaign of, we need to teach our children critical race theory, that didn't work out so well, did it? No. And it's continuing to not work out so well. But in the meantime, you've got stories like this, and it's like, okay, for those of you who aren't around, the 3%ers, and I'm not, I don't have anybody that I know. I don't, it's just not something that hits my dashboard. You know what I mean? But I do read about it, and they are put in such a light, like these articles, that it's like, okay, they've got 1 foot out of prison because they're just taking everybody down. And that is not the case. It's just not the case. But the spin is, it's so crazy. So 2 hours before she was sworn in with her first school board meeting, _𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 was in mud-spattered boots feeding farm animals on her family's 12-acre compound. See, they put compound, they don't put farm. Which is nestled in the woods behind a tall metal gate with signs warning that trespassers would be shot, as you do when you're out in the sticks and you are probably pretty far away from any kind of police protection. And that is also part of the reason you may carry a handgun. _𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 said that she would change her shoes and try not to cuss, but that otherwise she intended to be 100% herself on the board. So they're trying to paint her as a yokel. That's kind of just bottom line here, right? I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. I'm not anti-government, but I believe the government needs to work for people, _𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 said. And I think that has gone away. So that's kind of her stance on the whole thing. And I think government has not gone away, particularly the government that we're seeing here in Seattle. Government has kind of gotten to this massive overreach. And you've got a lot of folks out there who are doing some pushback. And you've got communities who are voting in members that maybe 4 years ago wouldn't have had a chance. But we've seen some of the stuff that's gone on. We've seen some of the results of what happens when things might, arguably go a little too far left. And here we sit. And so it's kind of like, all right, well, let's give this person a shot. And so you've got _𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆, who wasn't supposed to win, and she was asked to step in for somebody that realized that their home was just outside of a political border for the school district. And so she ran and won. And it's really interesting that the Washington Post is picking up on this type of story, because that's what's kind of going on with the media. The media is trying to tell you that the right and anybody affiliated to the right, these are their ideals. And they're painting it in such a picture that people are like, oh, geez, we can't have that. That can't be an accepted ideology. And yet, of the far right-wing groups, I think if you look through a lot of their stuff, it's not that hardcore. It's just not. But people want to paint it as such. Same thing with the far left. There's a lot of people who are probably more middle of the road Democrats. All right. But I run into more of those folks now that also kind of identify as, I can't really identify with the extreme left because, man, summer of 2020, that was not good. Same thing with people who are probably more moderate like myself. I don't identify with those who rushed the Capitol. That's not my thing. I was not on board with that. But to take those entire movements and blame all of them for everything that happened at the Capitol, that's a stretch as well. So it's got to be somewhere in the middle. Things have to become more reasonable. But I think what you're seeing is you're seeing some pretty heavy pushback, and you're seeing it definitely in some of our smaller, more rural, and inherently conservative towns. Eatonville being one. So the fact that there's a couple of 3%ers does not surprise me. Am I concerned for Eatonville as a result? No, not unless somebody shows me something that I should be concerned about, because I'm sure there's school board members that are going to even, the other folks who have a little bit more of a right, view on things. You're just going to have to see. So super interesting, not only that a 3%er won yet another election, but that the Washington Post chose to run this article from the standpoint of, are we being infiltrated by, far right extremist groups? You got to read between the lines. You got to kind of know what's going on, and you have to be able to look at this stuff and go, all right, what's the picture that we're painting here? Bottom line, is this reasonable? Some of this stuff in this article is reasonable. Some of it's not. And you just got to kind of figure it out on your own, figure out what's right for you. That's the bottom line here. Okay, that's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I will catch up with you soon on another one. Talk then. Bye for now.